everybody, and welcome. Today, we have an exciting duo on our podcast. We're going to have a conversation with Nara and Dorothy, mother and daughter. Well, actually, I said it in the opposite order, daughter and mother. Are going to tell us their nurtured heart story. So I know a little bit of this story already, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us how they came to nurtured heart, background, the transformational period, and how it's like now. We want to hear it all. So take it away, you guys. I want to hear from you.
Will do, but if you want to hear it all, we're going to need like 2 days. We only have 20 minutes. I'll start. Since I was the one who brought Nurtured Heart into the house, I am a clinical mental health counselor. I've been in private practice for well over 35 years. And to keep my license new, I have to have so many hours of CEU trainings. And one of those back in 2005 was Howard Glasser himself. He came to Nashua, New Hampshire to show, that was back in the early days of Nurtured Heart as well. So I went to listen to Howard, and as I'm hearing him, I'm thinking, boy, this guy, he really is onto something. This is powerful. So I just jumped in and I tried it on one of my first clients who was referred because he had intense and challenging behaviors. And he was a 4-year-old boy. So I said, this should be a piece of cake. He's only 4. So it was a piece of cake because he was a boy and he lived with elderly grandparents, and his parents were older than usual 4-year-olds, and a sister who's 10. So they were all kind of mellow people. So they just responded to his intense energy. So I talked about energy and all, and they shifted how they approached him, and his meltdowns were gone. So I thought, boy, this is, like I said, he really is onto something. So I kept having those successes over and over again. So I went to Tucson in 2008 to become an advanced trainer so I can help other people learn of it. And then, just on a more personal level, I adopted this person right here, this little cutie face, when she was 6 years old, from Russia. And although that was back in 95, 10 years after I learned Nurture Heart, we actually didn't tap into it ourselves until her rocky. How many more Rockies can I throw in there? Her turbulent teens and early 20s. So I'll let her take over at that point.
So I'm Nara. Some of you may know me from the CTIs from Nurture Heart Institute. And but as Dorothy just said, this was originally brought into my house when I was, 15? That was 2005. So I was a high schooler. I didn't really have, you hear people growing up on it now, kind of this new generation of NHA kids. I was a teenager. And I will tell you, looking back now, I was just not having it. I was not in that framework of mind of myself to really receive any sort of positive or recognition or any of that. So that was not, I just wasn't having it. And then I moved out of the house to go to college the first time at 18, didn't really do much with NHA. I mean, we kind of talked about it, but it wasn't really a part of our day to day. And then fast forward to when I was like 25, and we were in a situation where I had to move back home, and it was me, her, and my boyfriend at the time. And the two of those did not get along. It was lots of tension. Just, I saw the light. That's the spoiler of the story. We're not together, but at that time it was a lot. And to Dorothy's credit, she brought Nurture Heart back into the house full force. And it was really only at that time that I even saw the value of it. I mean, I heard the success stories from her, but to really experience it, it wasn't till I was in my mid-20s. And it was kind of forced upon me, honestly. But it was needed. I can give that recognition now to her that it was the best thing that she could have done to keep going at it. And it was really from that that I began to use it on myself, like that whole inner journey. But it took her modeling it for me to then internalize it. And then that's actually how the Greatness Journal that's now out there came about, which is here. And it's basically like what we did every day. It's a template. So like focusing on what's going right and then setting intentions for the next week. I mean, that's the short of it. And so then what I ended up doing, because I was in this horrible depression and lots of stuff was going on, I actually kept my own journal of like, okay, this is what I did. I got up today. Like it was that sometimes baby step level. And then it just kind of has grown into now kind of a full circle thing where I work with NHI. So I've really, in the last couple of years, have just embraced this as a way of life. And I guess for a little bit of background too, I was adopted from Russia, as she said, and I have a pretty extensive trauma history. And being an adopted person in a new country at 6 and having a minor walking disability, like I had all these cards that were kind of.
I didn't speak English.
I didn't speak English at the time. Like I had all these cards stacked up against me, I guess is what I'm trying to communicate. And that's what I love about NHA as a general framework is it starts to break some of that down. Like it doesn't matter where you come from or where you're going. It doesn't really even matter the age that it gets brought to you. So that's something I've just kind of picked up along the way as appreciation for that now sitting here at, I'll be 35 in January. So it's been quite the road, let's say.
Wow, there's so much to unpack here. There's like so many pieces of this that we could go into. Like you said, Dorothy, we would need 2 days. The fact that the fact that Dorothy, you were using it professionally and that it wasn't at home just yet until she was older and rocky. And then you tried to bring it in. And then your experience, Nara, that you're saying is like, that didn't work for me. Like I didn't take it at all. And then come back, a bunch of years later, 25, and then Dorothy, you're still bringing it in. So what I want to bring out of that is like, you didn't give up. You didn't give up on Nurtured Heart. You didn't give up on Nara, and you didn't allow her resistance and her lack of acceptance or receiving of it to convince you that it won't work or isn't good or stop you from believing, I guess, in her really, and the relationship and the possibility of relationship that's there. I know, so many stories where adoption stops at 18. They just walk out. They don't want to have anything to do with you. And you were like, no, this relationship matters. And I am not stopping. Like you didn't stop with like all of it sounds like Nara, you were like, stop. And she's like, no.
Yeah, and I have to say too, it's funny you mentioned the adoption piece because there was a point of time like we were almost not going to be speaking anymore. I mean, that was the level of intensity and like not okayness in terms of our original kind of where we started in our relationship. Like I don't want to sugarcoat that. It was not pretty. And it's kind of weird to say that now because looking where we are now, like I wouldn't have thought sitting here that that's where we would be. I thought I would have just the bare minimum relationship with her. And now, that's not clearly the case. She's sitting in my house, in my couch. Like, it's funny to think about that, but I want to be real for people that are listening to this. It was life-saving to our relationship in that sense because we were not going to be speaking. Like I had written that off at one point. So it just created a space where we could start talking kind of in the same language and not focusing on all the history that we had. Not that wasn't there, but.
Yeah, and that is so real. And that's so many people's stories that, it's not going to maybe land with your teenager. Does that mean it's over? And like, no, there's hope. Look what happened here with Dorothy's commitment and persistence. And Nara, you sounds like opened up to it eventually. I want to hear for maybe some of our beginner Nurtured Hearters, or even maybe some people who are listening who don't even know what Nurtured Heart is at all. When you say that Dorothy, that you brought it in, or Nara said this, but either of you can answer this question. Dorothy brought it in. You brought it in. You brought it to the house, whether at the teenage level or at the 25-year-old level. What does that look like? What does that mean that you brought it to the house?
You answer that.
Well, yeah. Since I learned of it in 2005, that was 10 years after she was home. So, by temperament, who I am, I'm Nurtured Heart by nature anyway. And what I learned very quickly with Nara as a child, I couldn't be my calm presence with her because with her extensive trauma, she would go from 0 to 95, 100 in a nanosecond, as we call it. So she was lost in her, I call it the tornado of her trauma. So for me to stay calm and grounded, I lost her. So I pictured it like a tornado. I had to get loud and crazy like her to get up to where she was so she can see me. Then I was able to bring her down and do all the comforting and nurturing. But it took a while to figure out that dynamic. And it really is energy because with my low key energy and she's intense, she didn't see me. I was invisible to her trauma. So by the time we got that dynamic, then we had a big dog named Sergey, and he was like the second parent, because when she was trying to detach from me, because that's part of the whole
Dynamic.
attachment detachment phase, he would just plop his big old head on her lap, and she'd start yelling and screaming and stroking his ear, and then she'd just start calming down. And it was beautiful. That was kind of a nice thing. So then we were able to decompress and debrief whatever it was.
Yeah. And I have to say too, to echo that, is your natural nature was to notice what was going right. So it wasn't like we were starting completely from scratch, because that was just almost the norm anyway. But I think what NHA did was, when it got intense, she knew what she needed to do. But also, I'm going to go kind of to the 25-year-old version of things. Now that I had language and that had built over time, I could then start applying that to myself. So then that internal stuff started to kind of, I don't know, almost like sink in a different way. It's like that whole planting seeds analogy. So I feel like that's what you did in that time, was she was just planting seeds and hoping that they landed somewhere. But it was really up to me to be like, okay, what am I going to do with this information that I now have? And that's where, when we were all in the house together, having somebody reflect that back to you, like, this is what I saw you doing right that week, or, this is how I saw you achieve the intention that you set. Here's the evidence for that. It actually helped to hear it, write it down, and then have it. I mean, I still have the original journal from that time. So I think for me, because that's the kind of learner I am, that's like the practical way that I started using it. And because I was starting to feel better, then her relationship and my relationship with other people improved, because my lens started to change. So it wasn't necessarily, I guess to answer your question, it wasn't necessarily a change that you could necessarily see very clearly on the outside, but through time you could see there was these different points where things really did transition and transform, and the way that I interact, now versus even 10 years ago.
And then being in her late teens, early 20s, and an adopted person, she was so ready that I was going to reject her, because she was of her original wound, as we call it.
Yeah.
So
that was the narrative.
She was just setting the stage for that to happen, that she was going to exit on her own terms, knowing that I was, quote, going to kick her out, which of course that never
happened.
I never would. And what was going on back then, she was seeking, maybe unintentionally, those who would reinforce that feeling that, look, I'm better, you're going to be kicked out. And so she brought in, friends and
people that were really just not,
that were ready to say, your mother's bad, I'm going to rescue you. Yeah. And that's what was going on with that young man that was living with us for that brief moment.
Well, it seemed brief. It probably seemed like a lifetime to you. And it's funny that you say that too, because she can say that because I now have come to that conclusion. But when you're in it, I think Nurture Heart is really key to that, because you don't even see, that clarity or that yes and no. Like, I had no boundaries with people. I was taking in whatever I could get, as weird as that is to say. So to then have that framework of like, okay, what is my yes? What is my no? And what am I not and are okay with? And I really think it helped me better discern the kind of relationships and people that I wanted to bring in. So it was kind of like this multi-layered thing that started to happen.
So if I'm reading this all right, you guys are all living together. This mom that is soon not going to be mom, because now boyfriend's going to, replace that and save me, all in the same house. So I want to zoom in on you, Dorothy, the hero here, who did not, like, absolutely no. Oh my gosh, the first stand of Nurtured Heart approach is absolutely no. Refusing to energize negativity, not letting that get your goat, not letting that take up your focus, not letting that be your place of operation, like moving yourself out of that. How? Like, tell us what that was like for you to choose to be reflective of success in that dynamic. Like, how are you even, I guess, a recognition and a question. Recognition is you were so dedicated to this child, to this family that you've built, and question is how.
Yeah.
Sorry.
When it was back when she was little, I had to get loud. We were in the basement where they were living, and I could see what was transforming before me.
Writing on the wall, so to speak.
I had to get loud, and I remember losing my voice from screaming so loud. And there was something that I said, although I don't remember what
Now
it
I don't
was,
know.
that landed for her. She heard me because I kept saying, "You are not seeing me. You are not seeing who I am." And I kept saying that.
I feel like
some other things,
yeah,
and then it
was
landed. So from that moment, we were able to then say, okay, we're all here together. Let's make the most of it, because in this house, we get along and we treat each other with respect. So I don't know what that moment was for you, but
Well, I don't even remember.
I knew I had to fight hard.
Well, I think it was that, but I also think, it's like a mirror. Sometimes you have to have things reflected. And I think in that moment, what you did is like you saw the writing on the wall, and then it was like I had that oh shit moment,
She did.
and it was kind of like, oh, I'm screwed. So and it became this kind of almost, this is going to sound like a weird word, but a battle within my own head, because here I have this person that I'm in a relationship with, but here's this parent and this person that has dedicated everything she has. And I kind of had a choice point, as weird as that is to say. And I think that's when you and I became kind of on the same team, because it was like, I saw like she's actually fighting for, regardless if he's in the picture or not, she's still fighting for it. And I think it was honestly your acceptance of that person. She wasn't asking me to, not be with him or kick him out, or, she wasn't okay with the things that were happening. And I think that was the delineation, like your clarity then helped my clarity of like, oh, this is not healthy. This is dysfunctional. This can be borderline, even abusive. And I just didn't have that framework. I mean, all my past relationships, I had nothing to go on. So I think by you creating that almost boundary and clarity, I finally had like a box that I could start kind of working in and not just be all over the place.
So what I hear is this stand, Dorothy, where you're not attacking or blaming or pointing fingers at Nara and her behavior and the way she's, not being appreciative or whatever, like where that would be the expectation, I feel like, of anybody who's acting like that, who's, living in your house, not being respectful, not wanting you and the relationship. And you were so clear on you said you're getting loud, you're losing your voice, but this fight is the fight for taking a stand for this relationship. Like, I am here, child. I'm not going anywhere. Like, almost, you can trust me. I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Like, it was all about you, kind of sounds, has a negative connotation sometimes too. But no, it was like, you are not making it about her. You're bad. You better shape up. How could you be doing this? How could you not see me? It was like, hey, 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 like, hey,
pay attention. Yeah.
You're not seeing me.
The narrative
You're
that
here.
was going on was not about me. No. And it had to be about me so she can have the relationship with me. She was creating a narrative that,
and I have to say,
it didn't describe me at all, but it described what this person, whatever he was doing or saying.
And I think that's the other thing is like, I want to be careful in giving the impression that it was all one-sided, because it wasn't, in the sense of like, yes, I was having influence from this person, but I had my own narrative and story of what I thought I deserved, even within our own dynamic of each other. But I think when you have a third party that's coming in and reinforcing that, it is really difficult it's almost like he was giving me evidence of everything I believed. So it's like 2 against 1. I know that sounds funny.
Was not who I was.
And I just had no way to see that. And I think by you getting loud, again, that whole intensity and energy thing, I wouldn't have seen it if she just sat me down one day and we tried to have a heart to heart. Like, I just wouldn't have seen it. And I think the dichotomy of the loud versus us being kind of in our own world, I think that also helped. I got to see the difference. And then ultimately, like, I got to make the decision. I guess that's where I would want to end up in this. Like, I got to make the choice. I didn't leave him because of her, in a way, but I also knew like the relationship was more important than the toxicity that I was, getting myself into and more entrenched. So it was just, I had to make the choice. And, like, we're kind of a packaged unit. It's just the two of us in that sense. Like, it's just us. So I had to make a choice. And I feel like that's where NHA helped me do that, because I got to see, like, what is it that I value, and, what is important.
So I'm going to need to speak to each of you again, but with our last few minutes here in the context of this conversation, Dorothy, I would like to ask you if if there's a mother out there right now who's struggling with a bio kid or an adopted kid or a foster kid, doesn't matter who, a kid that she's dedicated to, who isn't able to see that or know that because of their own history and because of their own narrative. What words do you have for her? What would you tell, if you could just hold her hands and look in her eyes and tell her one thing? What would you tell her? Struggling right now.
That the two of you are worth having a healthy relationship, and Nurtured Heart is the vehicle to get there.
It works.
It works.
That's what we say. It works. I mean, it's so simple, but it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, they say in the 12-step fellowship, it works if you work it and you're worth it. So you're worth it. Yeah. Wow. We're going to continue this conversation. I know it. Thank you so much for being here. I will post information to connect with Dorothy and Nara. Nara's open to it in the show notes down below, as well as the link to her workbook, which is for sale now. You can buy it and have a Nurtured Heart journal to do by yourself or with your family. Yay. And yes, Dorothy, I'm going to have another conversation about that too, because Dorothy can help you with building that core attachment that these kids are really looking for. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.